Hey maker, if you're tired of your products getting cut out of the listing image thumbnail, no matter what you do, then this video is for you. If this is your first time joining me, my name is Christina Nicole, and I am a product photography coach teaching makers like you how to take your own high quality product photos that actually attract more customers and make more sales for your product-based business. As a product photography coach for makers, the topic that I get the most questions about is how to properly size your images for Etsy. So in this video, I will cover what resizing is and why it's important. I will go over Etsy's recommendations for sizing your images, as well as show you what my own tests revealed. You will learn 2 mistakes you may be making causing your product photos to get cut out of the listing thumbnail image. And I will cover what my professional recommendation is when it comes to sizing your images for Etsy so that they look great on all devices. This video will cover a lot of information. So to help make it a little easier on you, I created a downloadable guide. You can grab your free copy of my complete guide to sizing images for Etsy by going to sizingimagesforetsy.com or by clicking the link in the description below this video. Depending on the camera you have and how you use it, your camera will produce an image that has a defined shape. This is called an aspect ratio. Your image will contain a certain number of pixels with a specific file size. Take the 12 megapixel iPhone, for example. When shooting vertically, also referred to as portrait, the iPhone will produce an image with an aspect ratio of 3:4 with pixel dimensions of 3024 by 4032 and a file size of approximately 2 megabytes. When shooting horizontal, which is also referred to as landscape, the iPhone will produce an image with an aspect ratio of 4:3 with pixel dimensions of 4032 by 3024 and a file size of approximately 2 megabytes. What comes from your camera isn't always the right shape for the listing thumbnail and how Etsy displays it. When your image isn't the right shape, Etsy will crop from the center out, potentially resulting in your product getting cut out in the thumbnail. Resizing your images with my 3-step process prior to uploading them to Etsy will not only guarantee your product looks amazing in search, it will also ensure your product photos load properly. Step 1 of resizing is cropping to the proper aspect ratio. When you go to crop, you will choose the desired aspect ratio from a list of set ratios, or you may have to customize your dimensions. An aspect ratio is just the proportional relationship between the image's width and height. Think of it as a very specific shape. Once you choose the desired aspect ratio, you will trim the image, staying within the set proportions in a way that makes your product stand out. When you trim out part of the original image, you are removing pixels, which leads us into step 2. Step 2 of resizing is reducing the pixel dimensions. Images are made up of millions of pixels that we typically can't see unless we zoom in. These pixels are little boxes of data. The more pixels we have, the more data we have, which means a larger file size and better resolution. All of this is great if we want to enlarge our images for print, but not so great when we want to use them online. Large file sizes can cause sites to run slow. So in step 2, you are going to reduce the number of pixels to meet platform recommendations. When we reduce the number of pixels an image has, we are removing data. By removing data, we are reducing the file size, but sometimes it isn't enough. Step 3 of resizing is to reduce the file size with a quality reduction. This just means we're going to compress the image data to make the file a little smaller. Keep in mind, all 3 of these steps do correlate. When you crop, you are removing pixels, which in turn reduces the file size. But that typically isn't enough. So we have to address each step to make sure we are meeting Etsy's recommendations. And at the time of me recording this video, here is what Etsy recommends. Etsy recommends you upload your images in a horizontal, also called a landscape orientation, meaning your image will have more width than height. Next, Etsy recommends a 4:3 aspect ratio. Again, an aspect ratio is just the proportional relationship between the image's width and height. And you set this in editing under the crop tool. So for every 4 units of width, there will be 3 units of height at a 4:3 aspect ratio. Next, Etsy recommends the pixels be 2000 on the shortest side. So at a 4:3 aspect ratio, the shortest side is the height, resulting in pixel dimensions being 2667 by 2000 pixels. Etsy states, images larger than 1 megabyte in file size may not finish uploading, especially on slower internet connections. So they recommend your file size be under 1 megabyte. Etsy also states, make sure that your thumbnail images have enough of a border that they can be cropped to a square thumbnail without losing some of the product. The gold overlay on this image represents how Etsy would crop this image to a square from the center out. While this information is available inside of the Etsy Seller Handbook, I take it a step further by actually testing how Etsy displays your images across the entire platform and on different devices. Let's start with the Etsy app and how your images will display in search on mobile and tablets. You may not realize this, but your product photos display differently on different devices. So on Android devices, your images are going to display as a 4:3 aspect ratio in search. And on Apple devices, your images are going to display as a 5:4 aspect ratio in search. But if someone clicks into your shop homepage will display your images as a square on both Android and Apple devices. As we move into 2023, Etsy is going to continue putting a focus on optimizing the shopper's experience on mobile devices. Etsy's 2022 third quarter financial report revealed that 67% of sales came from mobile devices such as smartphones and tablets. This number continues to rise year over year. Why square? Square takes up more space on the screen compared to the rectangular aspect ratio still used in search, allowing shoppers to actually see the product better. Which leads me to believe that Etsy may be testing how people respond to this and eventually switch to square altogether to account for continued increased mobile sales. On top of Etsy using a square to optimize the shopping experience on mobile and tablet devices, Etsy also allows shoppers to preview your listing video and additional photos without actually clicking into the listing. All they have to do is simply swipe left. It's important to note that for this feature to be effective, you will need to follow Etsy's image recommendations for all of your listing photos and not just the first thumbnail image. Even though mobile devices account for 67% of purchases on Etsy, we still need to take a look at how your images are displayed on a computer in the browser. When shoppers use Mac or PC to search for products on Etsy, your images are displayed as a 5:4 aspect ratio in search and on your shop homepage. These results only confirm that your images are being displayed a lot of different ways across multiple devices. And while this is helpful to see, the part that's really important is understanding how your images will look based on the aspect ratio you choose. Let's start with Etsy's recommendation of a 4:3 aspect ratio. If you crop your images to a 4:3 aspect ratio, this is how Etsy will crop to display them as a 5:4 and a square. Keep in mind that they will appear as a 5:4 on a computer and in Etsy search on Apple devices. Notice you don't lose much of the image in this scenario. However, when Etsy goes to crop the 4:3 to a square for your shop homepage on mobile, you are losing a significant portion of the left and right of your image. With this specific scenario, the goal is to keep your product within that square crop so it doesn't get cut out. Next, let's talk about how Etsy will display your photos if you upload them as a 5:4. If you crop your images to a 5:4 aspect ratio, this is how Etsy will crop to display them as a 4:3 and a square. Keep in mind that they will appear as a 4:3 in Etsy search on Android devices. Notice you don't lose much of the image in this scenario, just a tiny bit from the top and the bottom. However, when Etsy goes to crop the 5:4 to a square for your shop homepage on mobile, you are losing a little bit of a bigger portion of the left and right of your image. Remember, the goal is to keep your product within that square crop so it doesn't get cut out. Finally, let's take a look at what Etsy is going to do if you upload a square aspect ratio. Things get a little more complicated in this scenario. Even though I was very generous with my product placement and framing, I am still dealing with the product getting cut out. Keep in mind, when Etsy crops to a 4:3 to display the image in search on Android devices, the top and bottom of the image will get cut out. And when they appear as a 5:4 on a computer and in Etsy search on Apple devices, this is what will be removed from the image. Now, before we dive into what my professional recommendation is, I want to share 2 mistakes you may be making causing your product to get cut out of the listing image thumbnail. Mistake 1 starts with how you shoot your product photos. It is second nature for you to pick up your smartphone and want to shoot vertically because this is how we're used to using our devices on a regular basis. But shooting vertically is the number 1 mistake causing your product photos to get cut out of the listing thumbnail. Remember, Etsy displays images with more width than height, so get into the habit, pick up your phone, turn it horizontally to shoot your product photos. The second mistake you may be making is filling your image frame with too much of your product. When you frame your product too tight, it doesn't leave room for additional cropping to different aspect ratios. This will result in your product getting cut out. To account for additional crops, you need to find a balance with your own products. This will be personalized to your type of product and its shape. Play around with it and make sure you can see the product well in search without it getting cut out of additional crops. With 67% of Etsy sales coming from mobile devices and growing year over year, we want to focus on optimizing your photos for mobile devices. Did you know that Android is the leading mobile operating system worldwide at 71.8%? But in North America, Apple takes the lead at 55%. This may not seem relevant to you, but it's important to know how your customers are seeing your products in search. So this is something you may want to consider when it comes to deciding what aspect ratio you will use for your shop. Now, let's dive into my professional recommendation. While there isn't a huge difference between a 4:3 and 5:4 aspect ratio, you still have to decide which to use. Either is fine. The most important aspect to all of this is understanding how and where Etsy makes aspect ratio adjustments and how that affects the images you upload. My recommendation is if you are an international seller or if you sell internationally, to use a 4:3 aspect ratio. Android is the leading operating system worldwide, which means more people are viewing your listing image thumbnail as a 4:3 aspect ratio when you sell internationally. I always recommend picking up your smartphone and turning it horizontally to shoot. I follow Etsy's pixel dimension recommendations of 2000 on the shortest side. So at an aspect ratio of 4:3, that would be 2,667 by 2,000 pixels. I recommend a file size between 500 and 700 kilobytes. And of course, you want to make sure your product doesn't get cut out of that square crop on your shop homepage on mobile. So watch how tight you frame your product. Now, if you live in North America and you ship to any countries in North America but don't ship internationally, then I recommend you use a 5:4 aspect ratio because iOS holds the market share in North America, meaning more people are seeing your listing image thumbnail as a 5:4 aspect ratio in search. I always recommend you pick up your smartphone and turn it horizontally to shoot. At a 5:4 aspect ratio, your pixel dimensions would be 2500 by 2000. And I recommend a file size between 500 and 700 kilobytes. And you want to make sure your product doesn't get cut out of that square crop on your shop homepage on mobile, so watch how tight you frame your product. Want to see me resize a product photo with the software you're using? Let me know in the comments below this video what type of software you use to edit your product photos, and I will make a video just for you. Don't forget to grab your free copy of my complete guide to sizing images for Etsy. You can go to sizingimagesforetsy.com, or you can click the link in the description below this video. Please take the time to like this video if you found it useful, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to learn more about taking your own high quality product photos. See you next time. Complete guide to sizing images. Let's talk about how, do you want to see me? Do ya? Or click the link in the video, or click the link in the video below. Oh my God.